And welcome to the Talks Within the Nine-Sided Circle, a place for those who would rather be awake than entertained, though we are going to do our best to entertain you tonight with tales of the dervishes and ancient Egypt and all of this crazy stuff that we want to talk about. But before we do, if you're watching this on YouTube, take a moment to like the video, unless you don't like it, in which case take a moment to hate the video. We're happy with feedback either way. Think about subscribing, because if you subscribe and you hit that little silly bell button down there, then you will be notified every time we put a new video up, which, I mean, you can't beat that, because if nothing else, we are entertaining. Yeah. So tonight we are going to talk about the Enneagram and the tarot from a Sufi perspective. Now, I'm going to have to give you a little bit of history. And this is going to go against some of the modern so-called occult theories of the tarot and all of this, because originally, I mean, you look at the tarot now and it has all of these Kabbalistic associations and all of that, but that wasn't around until like the 18th century. But the tarot, as we know it now, more or less, has been around since the 1300s in Europe and considerably longer in North Africa. So there were these people known as the Mamluks. Mamluk in Arabic means slave. And what they were elite military. The Mamluks were mostly recruited from Turkestan, Central Asia, Turkey, the Balkans, and some of the northern Arab countries. And they were elite special forces. They were trained to the heights of military skills in their time. Not just military skills, they were trained in philosophy, science, religion, all of these things. And then the Caliph of Baghdad sent them into Egypt to take over Egypt for him, which they did. And as they did, they brought along their chaplains. And their chaplains were there for a number of different reasons. For religious instruction, but also they were there to work with them psychologically, because as anybody knows now, fighting in wars is bad for you. It's not healthy. And so the chaplains who were with the Mamluks worked with the mental health of the soldiers. And they worked with the spiritual development of these people. And of course, the chaplains were all Sufis. People don't realize that, but the chaplains were definitely of the Sufi variety. Now, they taught in various different ways, but getting back to the Mamluks for a second, after a time, the Mamluks decided that the Caliph in Baghdad was not doing a really great job of being a king. And so they decided that they were going to form their own caliphate, their own kingdom, which they did. And Mamluk Egypt was a pretty amazing place by all accounts. It was it took advantage of everything that had been there. It took advantage of the Ptolemaic traditions there, of the Greek writings. They had access to Plato and Socrates and Pythagoras and all of these sorts of things. And they were probably some of the best educated people in the Middle East and North Africa at the time. They were probably some of the best educated people in the world at the time. Excuse me, folks, while I make my phone shut up. There. So you have this, and you also have the fact that there were no printing presses. So in order to know things, you either had to buy or pay for the copy of very, very, very expensive books, or you had to know how to memorize things. And the method that they used for memorization is very important to this story. It's up here. In Arabic, it was called Tariqat al-Malikin, which means the way of places. The Greeks and the Romans knew it as the method of the loci. And in Europe, it became known as the memory palace. It is a way of memorizing and accurately both retaining and re-accessing huge amounts of complex data. For instance, before the printing press was invented, if you went to university, one of the first courses you took was a course in memory palace, how to remember the vast amount of information that was about to be given to you for the next several years. And it works like this. You learn to create in your mind places, pictures, and it can be auditory, it can be take in all of the senses, but it is most especially visual. In Europe, they actually had you imagine a giant palace, and the rooms would be filled with knowledge. The original that the Mamluks used were as a set of images. And this set of images is directly related to the tarot as we know it today. The 22 trumps and the 56 suit cards all represent images in a book that was carried in the mind by the people who were trained by the chaplains who were sent over in all of this esoteric stuff. And because people are lazy, and because these guys were in Egypt where everything was written down or drawn out, and they were, inspired by the drawings on the old temple walls and all of this, after a while, they started drawing these pictures out to help them remember what they look like, which in some ways was probably a mistake. But it's good for us because these pictures became the proto-tarot. And the pictures are divided up into the tarot, by the way, was called al-naib. Naib means a deputy, a surrogate, a representative. And so the naib was the representative of this book that did not actually exist except in the minds of the people who were taught this. And the book was divided up into 3 sections. The first section is the Warakata Rabbaha, which are what we know as the trumps. And that means the winning cards, literally. You could translate that as that. But this is the 22 trump cards. Yeah, flip back to the notes.
It's going to do that thing again.
Don't do the thing.
Okay.
Okay. So After that, you have the arbitaruk, which means the four ways, and those are the suit cards. And the suit cards consist of the ayasa, which are the batons, what we can now call the wands, the sara, which are the coins or the pentacles as they call them now, the saif, which are the swords, and the kas, which are the cups. And they were arranged this way in order to make it easy to remember them. Because from the top to the bottom, you have all of these associations that you do with them. The three parts represent the three forces, for instance. The face cards would represent the affirming force. The pip cards, the numbered cards, would represent the denying force, and the trumps represent the reconciling force. So you put them together that way. Then the four suits start with the four elements and four interrelationships of the elements. So you've got fire, water, earth, air. You've got hot, cold, wet, dry. You've got all of these different associations, and the pip cards relate to this world specifically.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking you should just talk.
Yeah, I need to get at my notes in order to talk sometimes because I'm old and my memory is slipping. So, the face cards, there are four of them. Well, four fours, actually. And they are Al-Malik, which is the king, Al-Malika, which is the queen, Faris, which is the knight, and Adra, which is the maiden. The maiden later on, when it got to Europe, became the knave and the page because you got that whole anti-women thing going on for some reason. But
Well, can we define the three forces?
Yes, the three forces are what we call wholly affirming, the force of moving towards, or what we would think of in Chinese philosophy as the yang force, the wholly denying, or the passive force, which in Chinese would be the yin force, and the wholly reconciling, which is the force that balances out the first two, which the Chinese don't really explicitly have, though it's implicit in what they do. The way that I like to think about it is at the level of atoms. You have the proton, that's your affirming force in the center of the helium atom. You have the electron, which is the denying force, the negative charge as opposed to the positive charge. And they are in stasis, in homeostasis, in balance, just those two when they're spinning about, where the spin balances out the pull of gravity or of the magnetic force pulling the two together is balanced out by the spin of the electrons pushing them apart. But if you want anything more complex than hydrogen in the universe, you have to have the neutral force or the reconciling force, which is represented by the neutron. Without that, the atoms of the nucleus of any atom would just blow apart because like charges repel. So in order to have a nucleus, you have to have a reconciling force that allows the like charged particles to sit with each other. So that's my metaphor for the reconciling force. And these three forces are ubiquitous in nature. We find them everywhere, and the universe is created out of them. That's how we look at it. Think of it as metaphor. So here you have this very complex book that was taught as a memory exercise first. And it was literally ordered into a story. And by the way, the neighbor kid has taken up the drums. And so if you hear pounding, I'm sorry, I have not snuck over there yet and hacked up his drums with an axe, but that's coming. So you have this story, and there are various versions of it depending on when and where, that was first memorized and then drawn out for ease of remembering into little pieces of parchment or vellum or papyrus or whatever, and was spread from Egypt across North Africa, across the Maghreb, all the way to Morocco. And what happened then was that around 1370, 1375, it entered into Europe by two routes. One was from Algeria to Sicily, which was a Muslim colony at the time, and from Sicily into Italy. And the other was from Morocco to Al-Andalus, which is Muslim Spain, and then from there into Northern Europe. It was not originally associated with the Gypsies. That came later too. And it got its Egyptian rep because the Mamluks were coming from Egypt. But it is not actually related to Pharaohic Egypt, as far as I can tell. Other people will disagree with me on that, but this is how I learned it. So that's the best I can say about it. And as I said, it's called the Naib, the deputy. And it forms, the entire book forms an allegorical teaching that the Sufi teachers would give to the Mamluk captains and generals and emirs and all of these hardcore dudes to use in their meditation and their practice to take with them in whatever they were doing. So before I go on, does this make sense so far? The next step is tying it into how it works with the Enneagram, and I want to make sure that this is clear enough to this point. So ask questions. Call me a liar. I don't care.
Yeah, and feel free to type in the chat or use mics. I just want to read a comment from Dave, which is funny and ties back to our talk from a couple weeks ago, which is
I wonder what's in
the drum.
Yes.
Yeah. One of our Sufi stories.
So, thoughts, questions. Does this make sense as a story so far? Can you see this as a possible history?
Nick says yes.
Yay, Nick. Terse and to the point.
Nancy says relationship between memory aid game and fortune telling.
No relationship to fortune telling. Fortune telling came way, way later, and when we get into the Enneagram, you'll see how that was likely to have evolved by the ignorant watching something happen that was not fortune telling, but could be mistaken for that.
Mm.
Yeah, the fortune telling part did not exist until probably the 15th century, maybe the 16th century. And that was where you got the gypsies and the hucksters and everybody who, there's nothing like a noble woman with too much time on her hands and too much jewelry in her case, and who will love to hear a fortune about the handsome young lord who's going to come and sweep her away.
Nick was agreeing with
Yes.
you about the terseness.
That philosophical bent.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions or thoughts?
I need to get that cricket sound again to play at times like this. Cheep, cheep, cheep.
I think the dogs barking and the drumming is
Sufficient?
sufficient.
Okay. All right. So, how does this all relate to the Enneagram? You might wonder. You might even ask. And even if you don't wonder or ask, I'm going to tell you. So, it seems that in Egypt, now remember, before the Mamluks, up until almost the 1st century AD, Egypt was Ptolemaic for 800 years thereabouts. That was the lineage of Ptolemy, who was the general of Alexander the Madman, also known as Alexander the Great, for some reason. Who, when Alexander died, he said, "I want Egypt." So he moved to Egypt and founded a dynasty, and the dynasty was fundamentally Greek in nature. And it produced two very important things. It produced a lot of important things, but the two that stand out are the Great Library of Alexandria, where the Ptolemaic pharaohs spent huge amounts of money and time and effort to collect every bit of knowledge that they could find from around the world, bring it to the Library of Alexandria, and translate it into Greek. So they would go to Tibet or India and get all of these texts, and they would get the people who could read the texts, and they would come back and they would teach them Greek, and they would make them translate them. This was a generational effort. And along with that was the Museon. The Museon is where we get our word museum, but it was a little bit different. The Museon was a place where scientists could go and become, the pharaoh would become their patron and support their research and give them access to the library. So the Museon was a place where geniuses congregated and did research. Now, one of the cool things about this is that all of Greek philosophy and mathematics was pretty much collected in Alexandria at the time. Now, there was a downside because there were these two guys whose names were Julius Caesar and Pompey. And they decided that they were going to fight over who got to rule the world. And they held the fight in Egypt. And as part of their fight, they caught the Library of Alexandria on fire, and it burned. Not everything was lost, but in succeeding decades and centuries, there were several fires and a lot got destroyed. But large parts of the Greek corpus were preserved, and one of the works that were preserved were the works of Pythagoras. And if you have attended any of my Enneagram classes, you know that Pythagoras is in the lineage of the Enneagram. The Pythagorean Enneagram was what you used before you had the modern Enneagram to do Enneagrammatic calculations. So the Mamluks, when they ended up in Egypt, collected up what was left of the Library of Alexandria and preserved it. And they moved everything from Alexandria and such to Cairo, where they could protect it better. And that included all of the Pythagorean stuff that was still existent. Some genius noticed a correlation between the Enneagram and the Naib, the book, or the Kitab al-Naib, the book of the deputy. Somebody just said something, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nancy says, there's no modern project like the Library of Alexandria, is there? We collect a lot.
But not the effort to translate. The closest thing I know of to that is the Internet Archive, which is trying to collect up vast amounts of knowledge, and it's in several different languages. A lot of it has not been translated, but at least you can get access to it. And if you guys are not members of the Internet Archive, which is free, you ought to be, because you get cool free books. This was where I found that copy of The Journey to the Lord of Power that we use.
Ibn Arabi.
Ibn Arabi's book, yeah. That's the closest thing I know of today. That and the Gutenberg Project. So there are two. The Gutenberg Project is attempting to get every book that is in the public domain together on the internet in one place where you can download them.
Yep.
And I've gotten a lot of books from the Gutenberg Project, yeah.
Good thoughts, Nancy.
Yes. But yeah, there needs to be both a Library of Alexandria and a museum again.
Yeah, she said, we're up against being swamped rather than information being expensive. Yeah, yep. And both of those are challenging. Nick says, best way to hide true information is embedded in a seemingly endless amount of false information, i.e. internet.
Yes. So, the cards, for whatever reason, and I don't know if somebody redid them to make them fit the model of the Enneagram or they just naturally did, which is not far-fetched, because the Enneagram is organic, as are the story of the cards themselves. So the fact that the cards can be arranged in octaves and in threes, lends themselves to this. Now, one of the things that you could do if you understood how the Enneagram works is that you can create stories from the cards. And each of these stories is informative. Kyle and I were just working on this a couple days ago.
Yep.
Because I'm teaching her about this right now. And if you were to look at it from the outside, it would look like I was casting a fortune. But it's not that. It is allowing, what's the word? It's kind of like allowing your universal flow to tell you where to start the story. And as the story emerges from the deck, it can give you information on how to work on yourself. It's not about telling the future. It's not about finding out who's going to win the next Kentucky Derby, or if the boy down the street or the girl down the street has a crush on you. But it can be used to tell you the areas that will be most beneficial for your self-work. And it can be very powerful for that. If you understand that it's not prognosticating, it's not trying to tell a fortune. And it follows the exact pattern of the Enneagram to do this. The original way to lay it out, to let the book emerge, to let the story emerge, was to use the Pythagorean Enneagram, which is that you do that if you want to keep this hidden.
I just want
Yeah.
to add in something. Nancy says it's telling you the present.
Yes.
Yeah, we kind of talked about
Yeah.
that. You and I did. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. It gives you a read on where the reality point within the chaotic matrix is. You're whipping around the Lorentz attractor of your life, and you are at one point in it, and it can let you see where that point is. So,
You're talking about Pythagoras.
Pythagoras, yes. If you want to hide how to do this, you use the Pythagorean Enneagram because it's much more obscure. But if you want to just do it and be able to see the relationships very easily, then you use the Gurdjieffian Enneagram, because then the relationships they just pop out at you. And that's what I recommend now. I have stopped using the Pythagorean Enneagram for this entirely because it's so clunky in comparison to the Gurdjieffian Enneagram. And it's so much easier to see the relationships in the Gurdjieffian Enneagram. So as the chapters of the story emerge, they emerge on the points. The moving lines, the shock points, and the linear movement all exist within the story. And you literally can tell a story from each of the points. There are always 10 cards, not 9, because there is always a card in the center of the Enneagram, which is the teacher card, sort of like the bee in the center of our Enneagram. And that is the entire purpose of the Enneagram, as I understand it, from a Sufi perspective. From a Sufi perspective, it is a way to take a read, as it were, to take a sounding of where you are, and then use the knowledge of within this book to determine how it might be best to proceed with your own development. It will not tell you which stocks to buy. It will not tell you whether or not you should go on a trip, but it will tell you, look at these things within yourself. It will tell you, confront these events in your life, things like that.
We did start with a question.
We did start with a question, yes. And you get to start with a question, but it doesn't give you...
it's not like a yes or no, shake the 8 ball kind of thing.
So, in a nutshell, that's what we're talking about. What do you think? You need to lean over so your face is not, it's hacked off. I know it's hard. But,
okay.
So, are we looking for other things that I haven't talked about in the notes?
Just checking, yeah.
Yeah, we should. Yeah, that's all history that we really don't need to go into. Okay, so.
All right. So Nancy says it's at least plausible.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's plausible, and it's even reasonable. It's more reasonable than claiming that it is some ancient hidden teaching from Egypt. Because we have some historical documents pretty much suggesting that this is likely. But it's still a story. And that's all it ever will be, because until we find some papyri from the Mamluk period saying, I, Abdul Wahab, have taught my minions this methodology in this way, and I had them all draw these little cards, it's a story.
Minions, huh?
Minions.
Okay, so Nick asks, in placing the cards, do you lay the face card in affirming positions, number cards on denying positions, and so on?
No. And he was silent.
Yeah.
No, there is a way to lay out all of the cards in order to see the book. And that works like this. In the center, at one point, you put the Fool. Then you take the other 21 trump cards, 3 sevens, and you lay them in a triangle, starting with 1, the magician, working down 7, working across 7, and working back up 7, so that the world, or whatever the last card is sitting next to the magician. Then you take the suit cards, and they form a square around that triangle, starting with the wands on the top, going from ace to the king, and then going down with the cups.
Yeah.
And then across with the swords, and then up with the pentacles.
To form a square.
To form a square. And that is the order of the cards that you can use to read the book from beginning to end. This is a great and mystical secret. You are now all sworn to silence on this, on pain of Egyptian mummies coming and stalking your house. Not really. Tell everybody.
Okay. Do you have any photos of this setup?
No. But we will have not a photo, but graphics at some point.
It's hard to fit it all into a photo. It takes up
the entire floor. With a basic deck of the usual size tarot cards, it took up the entirety of the floor of my room.
Dave says Mushtak should put the Norwegian sweater back on and do a video of the deck. Thoughts?
I would put my Norwegian sweater on the deck.
Okay. Mustaqim says, I might need to rewatch this topic again. Many new information for me to digest. I'm new to tarot and Enneagram. Yeah.
Yeah.
I had that thought as we were talking, but that's kind of one of the challenges of doing this content, is that unfortunately every video kind of ties into all the others.
Yeah, and the video will be up on YouTube by tomorrow, so you can watch it as many times as you like.
Yes.
And you're on the forum, so questions about this can be posted to the forum, and Kyle and or I will answer them.
Absolutely. Yes.
As soon as is humanly possible.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't want everybody to see your question, just send me a private message.
Cool. Okay, so Dave says 3 times 7 trumps. What's with the names of these?
What do you mean, what's with the names? You mean like the Fool, the Magician? Yeah.
Yeah, just in terms of where the names come from. Why are those particular archetypes, I guess, chosen?
They help to make the story. And the story is the... you remember the term insani kamal, the perfect man, the perfect human being, the awakened human?
Yeah.
Yeah, the trumps are the steps to get there. And so each of these, like the mage, the magician, the juggler is another term for that, interestingly enough. And I have to access my notes, which are sitting in Michigan right now, to get all of the original names for the cards, or at least the oldest names that I know. They're a little bit different, and the arrangements can be different from the modern decks in a couple of significant ways. And I wonder about that. I know that Waite, when he did his deck, purposely misarranged a couple of the cards. Because he wanted to sell the deck and make money, and sell his book on the tarot and make money, but he didn't want to give away all of the secrets. So he purposely screwed stuff up. Yes, I shame. Yes. And we know that because he got his stuff from the Golden Dawn, and we now have access to the original Golden Dawn methods, which are closer to the original as I learned it. So, yeah, I can tell you that the 3 7s represent the 7 notes of the octave, where the the next card coming up is the octave note, the starting on the next octave, and the Fool is the final note or the beginning note, depending on which way you're going.
Okay. Nick says, what relationship do the suit cards squaring the Enneagram have to the Enneagram?
Squaring the Enneagram? You mean the square in the layout that I just described, the triangle, the square, that one? They have a bunch of different relationships to the Enneagram. I would have to lay them out so that you could see them for it to make sense.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah, we haven't even got to that in her lessons yet
right.
because we need a bigger floor.
So it pretty much looks like there's, let's say, one card in the middle, right?
Yeah.
And then a triangle around that one card. And then around that triangle, there's the square. So that's the visual of the book that we're talking about,
Yeah.
the metaphorical book that we're talking about. The Enneagram spread is separate from that image.
Yeah. And the associations with the points of the Enneagram, which you can lay the suit cards out on, that's another completely different thing. And that gets very complex. That's advanced stuff, and we can't get to that tonight, unfortunately. Are we being even remotely clear on this? Just to make sure, because this is a hard subject to discuss. So I keep needing to check with you guys to see if we're sort of making sense.
Nick says, boo, he wants to know more.
Yep, you will know more, Nick.
Yeah. Yes, clear but not specific enough to be useful.
Yeah. I think
Darn it.
visuals would be helpful.
Yeah, visuals would be helpful on this, and we're kind of working on that. But if you have a deck of cards, you can start laying them out in these two layouts and see what happens. Look at the cards from that square and triangle layout, and imagine that each card is a chapter in a story. That can be useful. More thoughts?
Nick says, interesting.
So, the Kabbalistic associations with the tarot, as far as we can tell, they showed up either in the late 17th or early 18th century. We don't see any evidence of them before that. This is not to say that they don't fit wonderfully, because they do. But they are a later addition to the corpus. Same with the Egyptian stuff. The Egyptian stuff, the pharaonic Egyptian stuff was added even later than the Kabbalistic stuff, and that was in the 19th century. And for that, you have to look at the magical brotherhoods of the time, like the Golden Dawn and those sorts of groups that were attempting to graft the old Egyptian magic onto their ceremonial magic. And so everybody tries to stuff stuff into the tarot, but at its most primal form, the pictures didn't have any associations except with the story, as I understand it. Any more thoughts? Questions?
Okay. Dave says, Which are the more auspicious decks to find?
The Crowley deck is fun. I like it. Basically, go online and look at pictures of the cards and find ones that suit you. Some of the modern ones I think are a little bit lame because they're political, like the Mother Peace deck, which has always made me sad because what they did with the Mother Peace deck was remove all masculine attributes from the cards. And that doesn't work. But any of the older decks are fine. The Crowley deck, the Golden Dawn deck, there's a couple of different versions of that. The Builders of the Adetum deck. And yeah, other than that, it's a matter of aesthetics because the cards in and of themselves are only association with the meaning. And the meanings you have to be taught. You have to have somebody go, this is the juggler, and it means this, and this is the story of the juggler. This is the story of the priestess. This is the story of the king. This is the story of the queen. This is the story of the priest. This is the story of the chariot. And each of those cards has a story, and they all fit together. And yes, I'm working on it.
I mean, I have both the Crowley deck and I have this one just because aesthetically
it's beautiful.
It's pretty. Yeah, it's this one.
What's the name?
It's the Shadowscapes Tarot deck.
Oh.
Yeah.
Can you see that?
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lovely deck.
It's got pictures like that in it. I figure I'll just share with you because, everyone's going to have different tastes. Come on.
Yeah, you got to back up a little bit, I think.
There we go. Yeah. So this one's a bit more fantastical, I guess. It's described as having like Asian, Celtic, and fantasy themes. So.
Yeah. Though, you know what the best deck is? The single best deck is the one you draw yourself. That's my opinion.
Nick says, you answered my question with, yes, I am working on it. Yep, I know what you're talking about. Yeah. Plans.
Yep. More work for Kyle.
Yep.
All right. Any more questions? Thoughts?
Nancy asks, Charles Williams, author of The Greater Trumps, had a Golden Dawn connection, made a big deal of the Fool. Well, the Fool is a
big deal, yeah.
Yeah. I just didn't know if this was, of any use here.
Yeah,
interesting novel.
There is nothing that is not of use here. Mm-hmm. So by all means, do not hesitate to put that kind of stuff in because as I like to remind everybody, I am not the end-all and do-all of knowledge on all of this stuff. Each of you has something that I don't know, so throw it out there. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Fool, Nick asks, Ouspensky's interpretation. There are areas of Ouspensky's interpretation that are okay. I like some of it. So yeah, that's worth looking at, and I think you can find his book on the Internet Archive. Alrighty then. So Let me thank you all for being there. And for those of you who are watching this on YouTube, let me remind you again, like the video, hate the video, subscribe to our channel, hit the little reminder button so that you can know when we put stuff up. Look in our about stuff so you can find us on Facebook. You can find us on Instagram. We even have a Twitter account, which may actually have something on it one day. You never know. And read Dave's article when he publishes it, because it's always fun. Yeah. So, with no further ado, I am going to end the recording.